Hey everybody, and welcome back to the History of Video Gaming. I'm Wes, and I am joined here with Ben for another episode. How you doing, Ben?
Good. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing great. So let's start off. What games you've been playing this week?
Well, as you know, I went on vacation last week. So
Yeah.
we flew out somewhere, so I kind of downloaded a bunch of mobile games right before we left, so I could do something in the airport. And one of them actually, I stuck with, which I don't play
nice.
I don't play any mobile games, but yeah, I've been playing a lot of Marvel. What is it called? Marvel Strike Force, I want to say.
Oh yeah. I feel like weren't you playing that in college too?
I think you're thinking about Contest of Champions, which some of our other friends already got into. But yeah, I was playing Strike Force, which is kind of like one of those. You've got like a team of 5 heroes, each have like 3 abilities, kind of like Pokemon style, and you kind of fight another team of 5.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. The real key thing was they gave me the Punisher within like the first 30 minutes.
Oh, so you were sold.
Yeah, I was sold at that point, and yeah, it's an alright game. I feel like I've played it quite long for a mobile game, and I'm still kind of every now and then I'll log on, collect my free stuff.
Yeah, that's saying a lot for a mobile game.
Yeah. I don't know how long I'll stick with it, but I've been enjoying it. And then once I got back, I actually, I had a lot to do. But last weekend I reinstalled Age of Mythology, the old RTS computer game of my childhood. And
oh yeah,
man, it's still good. This is exactly what we talk about when we say judging games by today's standards, because this game holds up, man. It is so good. It's got this really lengthy campaign, and the story's great. The campaign's nice and varied. It's a lot of content. There's gotta be, I don't know, 25, 30 missions at least.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot, and man, it's just so good. As soon as I booted it up, the music started, and I was like, oh my gosh, this music is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
so is that the original Age of Mythology? Because the third one's the most recent, right?
Yeah, well, so Age of Mythology came out, then they had a big expansion called Titans, and I have the gold edition, so I have those first two. And then
nice.
15 years later or something, they released a new expansion on Steam, which was met with really bad reviews. So I haven't played it. But,
probably for the best if you don't want to spoil the experience.
Yeah, I kind of thought so. But it's amazing. You've got this massive game, right? And it launched with the campaign, with versus AI, with a multiplayer, with a map editor. People, you can make your own campaigns with cutscenes and everything. There's just so much content in the game, and it's just so good. I can't recommend it higher.
I feel like you don't see it with games a lot anymore either. For a while when we were in high school and before high school, probably everything had a map editor with it, all the Source Engine games, StarCraft, of course.
Yeah, I remember playing, I think it was called Time Splitters.
Yeah.
Which you played through different ages, I guess.
Yeah.
And that had a map editor that I would use all the time to play with my brother. So yeah, we just don't see I feel like nowadays that would be a $5 microtransaction or something. So
yeah, really. Download the extra expansion, which gives you the map editor.
Yeah, or the expansion packs. We just don't see big expansion packs anymore, other than The Witcher. I know has them.
Yeah, yeah. Witcher did some good expansions, and some of them big titles still do it. But yeah, it's all season pass kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's just not as good nowadays, I feel like. But the Titan expansion was a full campaign that I haven't even started replaying yet. But it's just as long as the original.
That's nuts.
And added a new faction, I think. So yeah, it's super good. Just awesome. So yeah, that's what I've been playing. What have you been playing, Wes?
So I've been, you mentioned mobile games, and I've been declining to mention every single week that I still always play Pokemon Go, and that's all I'll say about that. Other than that,
did they just have a recent expansion or something? I thought I saw something.
They're doing a bunch of integrated other apps, and I think some of them might be mobile apps, some of them might end up going on the Switch, but I think they're doing something where it's supposed to be from all the new games you can have like a home for your Pokemon.
Okay.
Or something. So I don't know. I mean, if it's somewhere where I can basically just throw the stuff I caught on my phone on the TV, that'd be pretty sweet. But
yeah.
I probably wouldn't pay for it. I'm not that into it.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that they're still working on it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely died out a lot from when it first released, because that was just a huge rush of like everyone who's nostalgic about Pokemon playing it.
Yeah.
But there's still a decent group of people who still play it, I think. I think they're still doing pretty well.
Good. Yeah, that sounds cool.
And other than that, mainly just trying to finally grind through and beat a Darkest Dungeon campaign.
I mean, that's a tall tale.
it's real rough, but I'm loving it, and I'm finally starting to get like the ways that you can do party compositions and moves and stuff to make the upper level fights a lot easier. So it's really starting to gel. I'm getting into it.
Nice. That sounds good.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot to talk about this episode. So
we do.
Before we move into our special topic, I've got 2 quick updates. First of all, Wes and I will not be publishing a podcast next week. Wes is very busy and I've got a lot of research to do. So, it'll happen from time to time, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. We just want to give you guys a heads up. Also, last week I was kind of talking about some of the difficulties when it comes to making the timeline, and I completely forgot about mentioning what I do when games don't have firm release dates. So a lot of the games we're going to talk about today, the only thing I know about them is that they were made sometime in 1973. But was it January, March, September? Who knows? So what do I do with games like that? And the answer is I kind of put them wherever they sort of fit best topically. So, for example, if we're talking about computer games, because a big computer game came out, I might throw other computer games that I don't really know the exact date with that one so that we can kind of talk about computer games for a while and not just kind of randomly throw things in every now and then or leave a big dump of lists at the end. So, yeah, I just kind of want to mention that because we're going to be talking about a lot of games today that don't have good release dates, and I kind of wanted to just tell everybody why I put them in the order that I did. It's kind of more to help things flow than if I think that they were actually released in that order, but I do my best. So,
and they're definitely all going to be on a very, very similar topic once we get to them today, so it'll make a lot of sense, I think.
Yeah, once we get into it today, you guys will understand. I think with that, Wes, why don't you start the special topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we are later going to be getting to one of the games that we played, Pong. So we thought it would be a great time to talk about Atari and the huge role that they're going to be playing in video game history as we go through episodes to come. So special topic today is mainly going to be about the history of Atari and the founders and what they did leading up to and before Atari, and then kind of ending with when they founded Atari, and then Ben's going to give a little bit of some of the years after that, after they founded it. So the 2 founders are Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. They were actually both working for an electronics company called Ampex when they met. And I looked it up because I was curious. Ampex is still around today. They're making like avionics technologies, and it looks like they're kind of spread out doing tons of other stuff as well.
Interesting.
And Bushnell and Dabney, when they were both working at Ampex, they were introduced to each other when Bushnell was just about to be hired, and they started to get along really well because they were both very enthusiastic about engineering and about working with technology. And Bushnell got Dabney interested in the game that you know, Ben, that I have never played, which is Go, the Japanese game.
I do love a good game of Go, although I'm terrible at it.
And I'm not sure if these guys were good either. Sounds like they might have been, because Bushnell was like full-on Go fan for a while.
I mean, I was a full-on Go fan, but I am not good. It's just one of those things where if you know what you're doing, you're like 1,000 leagues above anybody else.
Right. Once you get to the top of that like learning curve, you're just like decimating everyone who doesn't know yet.
Yeah.
And the reason that Go is important is, one, it helped them bond, and they when they would eventually go into found Atari, it kind of was helped start their relationship. But also the name Atari comes from a certain board state, I guess it would be the right word for it, in Go, when someone's piece is about to be taken, I think.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I just thought, I mean, honestly, I actually thought Atari was a Japanese company before I started researching all this, and then found that it was two like American dudes in California.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from playing Go, Bushnell was actually in touch with somebody who worked on Space War, which was in, I think it's the Sale Institute, or I know that abbreviation means something, but it's the institute where specifically they had the Space War game set up for people to play. And he played that, and he decided he wasn't making the money he wanted to, and he also always kind of seemed like he had an entrepreneurial spirit, so he wanted to make an arcade version of Space War, and which would later be go on to be created and called Computer Space, which is also one that we played.
Yep.
So he teamed up with Dabney when they first started. It was called Syzygy instead of Atari, spelled with all Y's and a Z. So I mean, it's maybe we'd be used to saying it now, but I'm kind of glad they changed to Atari. A lot easier to say.
I'm glad too.
And in 1971, Bushnell left Ampex and started working for Nutting Associates, which we heard about when we were talking about Computer Space. It was a company that made coin-operated games and also the cabinets to house those games. And Bushnell's idea was that he would work as a chief engineer for Nutting Associates during the day, but on the weekends he would work with some of their equipment, the knowledge that he was gaining there, to make Computer Space. And so he ended up making that. Didn't do super well, but then they started to have more ideas and they wanted to keep working together. And eventually, as I'm going to talk about later, they would come out with Pong, and they changed their name to Atari in June of 1972. And as I was reading through all this stuff, it's kind of crazy how it doesn't seem like Bushnell knew too much how to run a business. We'll see later that once Pong was really successful, they didn't understand how to keep up with the manufacturing needs of the arcade cabinets to keep distributing them, but somehow they managed it, and we still know Atari today, so we know that they ended up doing it really well, and they were pretty successful.
Yeah,
and then just a little bit to wrap it up and lend more to the enigma that is Nolan Bushnell. He sold the company to Warner Communications, which is now like Time Warner Media, I'm pretty sure, in 1976, and was shortly after he sold the company fired, or as he says, resigned. He said it was a mutual arrangement. And we're not too sure who to believe on that. But then later he would also be known for creating the Chuck E. Cheese chain of pizza arcade stores.
Oh gosh.
I know. From Atari to Chuck E. Cheese. Yeah. He always had a love for animatronics, I think.
Okay. Well, to everyone their own.
Yeah, someone has to, I guess. And that's pretty much the main stuff that I covered on the basic founding of Atari. Did you have anything else you wanted to cover on that?
I just want to talk about, I've been researching the next couple of years of the timeline, and there's a couple interesting things about Atari I wanted to briefly talk about, because I don't know when we're going to have time to cover them in a special topic coming up. So just a couple things that happened in the early 1970s with Atari. After Pong kind of blew up, as Wes mentioned, Atari had a hard time keeping up with demand, and as a result of the hundreds of thousands of Pong clones that would eventually hit the market, only about 10% of them would be the original Pong game, which I thought was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Also, in 1973, Key Games, that's spelled K-E-E, kind of launched as a quote-unquote rival to Atari, but the leader of the company, Joe Keenan, would actually be a longtime friend of Nolan Bushnell, and Key would go on to kind of like re-release their own version of Atari's games, and Atari did that in order to avoid exclusivity agreements within the publishing industry. So they kind of set up this fake company to like publish their own games under a different name and then sell to two publishers.
I was reading about that too, and it's interesting because apparently after that, I think Keegan or Keenan was the guy's last name.
Yeah,
Keenan. He ended up running the other fake company so well that they made him president of Atari, right?
Yeah. So in 1974, Key Games produces a hit game that we'll talk about later, but it was so successful that their relationship with Atari was discovered. But because that game was so successful, the publishers were like, I guess we'll keep working with you. But at that time, Key and Atari, there wasn't no point in them being separate, and they merged, and Joe Keenan became the president of Atari. So that's kind of interesting. Also, in 1974, Magnavox would sue Atari over Pong, saying it was a a copy of table tennis for the Magnavox. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is, I think they're very different games, but the courts more sided with Magnavox, and Atari had to settle, and because of that, they had to sign a licensing agreement with Magnavox, which took away their income for Pong somewhat. And also because of that, Atari couldn't go after Pong clones themselves because they kind of stole Magnavox's idea. So Magnavox would kind of go around suing all these Pong clones that are going to pop up, not Atari, which is interesting. And then finally, I just want to briefly say, we'll talk about the Atari games coming up here over the course of the next couple episodes, but once Atari made Pong, they were super small. There were 3 people at the time, and it was a massive hit, but I think a lot of people thought, they just got lucky, and that's all we would hear from Atari. But it was really clear, and I want to really emphasize this, that Atari became the industry leader almost immediately and would go on to produce hit after hit after hit after amazing game, something brand new, something really interesting over and over and over again. So right from the very beginning, I feel like they not only kind of sparked the video game industry with Pong, but they would go on to lead it almost immediately. So I think it's really interesting. Atari's going to be such a big name, and I love that they, it was clear from the beginning they weren't just a one-hit wonder, but people that were really talented and had a really big passion for video games. So I love that.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you wanted to say, Wes, before you get into the timeline?
Well, just another interesting thing when we're talking about all these Pong clones that are going to be coming up. We actually found while we were doing research that 90% of all coin-op games that were produced in 73 were Pong clones. So,
which is a staggering number.
Yeah, it just kind of shows how much of an impact that made on the industry and how it sort of defined the industry at that time.
Yeah, it'd be like if Fortnite came out and then 90% of every single video game had a battle royale in it for the next year. It would be insane. But I feel like part of that is because we're going to see a lot of new names jumping into the industry. So once they're more established in the industry, they'll go on to make their own stuff. But for right now, they saw a fad and they were gonna jump in on it.
Right. Yeah, can hardly blame them.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's get into the timeline. Welcome back. So for our first game of the timeline, we've got Star Trek. And I know what you're saying, Ben, haven't we already played Star Trek? Yes, we have, twice now. But this is a new one. This one is by a company called 4Play, which, for the record, is the worst company to try to find research for, because you're literally typing Star Trek 4Play.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's tons of hits. I bet.
Yeah.
Can't find enough articles about that.
As far as I know, it was a computer space clone, but it was never made, I think, because I did find that they had a lawsuit against them from Paramount for the Star Trek license. And I think that made the game never produced, but they could have potentially sold some before that lawsuit came in. But if they did, I didn't find any evidence of it. Obviously, there's no emulation, and that came out sometime in 1972, I think, in late 72. So, yeah, just one game, and now, why don't you talk about Pong, Wes?
Yeah, without further ado, early in this timeline in this episode, we're going to start talking about Pong, the big one.
I'm just so excited.
Knocking stuff over. Just to clarify, this is the arcade cabinet version of Pong. It wouldn't be until 1975 that the home version of Pong comes out. And this came out in November or 29th of 1972. And so, as we know, Atari created this. This is the first game that Atari ever developed, and it was after Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney left their respective companies to make Atari that they helped create this game. And it was really created by an American computer scientist that they recruited named Alan Alcorn. It's interesting because Bushnell just kind of came to Alcorn and sort of to prove himself and to see what Alcorn could do, said, hey, could you make something that's sort of like table tennis on the Magnavox Odyssey? I don't know if he said those exact words because I know there was a lawsuit associated with it, but they wanted something similar to that. And they were so impressed by the product that Alcorn came up with that instead of just treating it as a training exercise, they wanted to develop it further and make it into a game. And so after they worked through it, the original prototype that they made, the cabinet that they made, was installed in a local bar and reportedly earned $35 to $40 a day, which when you think about the time, that's pretty good. And apparently it was a lot compared to what any other coin-op machines in the industry were doing.
Yeah, I think for Computer Space, their game before this, I think they were charging a quarter for it, which at the time I think most games charged like a dime or something. So it was already kind of expensive, and I think Pong was also like a quarter. So people would pay a little extra for these early video games.
Yeah, and it kind of proves that this one really took off if it's consistently making money and it's a little bit above what people would normally be paying for like a pinball machine or other games at the time.
Right.
And it became so popular that, as we mentioned earlier, Atari, since they were so new at the time, kind of struggled to keep up with the manufacturing demands. And as we know, it also became very successful as with many other clones and remakes and as a home game, as well as an arcade game in later years. But without further ado, let's get into the gameplay. People pretty much know Pong, so I'm not going to cover it too much. It's really similar to the Magnavox Odyssey table tennis that came out earlier, but there's some key differences that I think probably made it a lot more popular. One of them, I think, is since the Magnavox was a home system, it's probably a lot harder for people to get at the time, or it's a lot more expensive. Whereas 25 cents in an arcade, you don't have to, there's not as much buy-in for you to just go in and play one game or two games or anything like that.
Right.
And also, this one had scoring on the screen, which is small, but I feel like a huge difference from having to manually keep track of the scoring as you would with pretty much all the games in the Magnavox Odyssey.
Yeah, that's very true.
I know for me at least, that's the ease of access there makes it a lot likely for me to play it. And also going along those same lines, it didn't have a rally point scoring, which is like the way that real tennis and ping pong are scored. It just had if the ball goes off the screen, no matter who served, as far as I know, unless there was different rules for the original Pong. But if somebody hits it, it goes off the screen. The person who hit it off the screen scores a point.
Yep.
So it makes it a lot easier.
I believe also, so like when somebody scores, the ball like comes from the middle, and if you don't hit it, you like lose a point like automatically. So you don't even have to hit it once in order to lose a point for the original.
Right. So probably that also made it a lot more fast paced and maybe engaging for people at the time because it moves a lot quicker than if you're just doing the older table tennis game on the Magnavox Odyssey. And also it had sounds for when a ball bounced and when somebody scored. So I feel like at the time that's also, even if it's just these loud electronic bleeps, it's kind of creating that arcade atmosphere that we'd come to now. We like, you hear all the dings, you hear the ping pong machines, and you associate it with an arcade immediately.
Yeah, and I feel like the biggest difference, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, is you can't move anywhere on the screen, because for the Magnavox, it didn't have any boundaries, so like you could actually move your square to like the opposite side of the court,
Right. That's true, and I actually didn't think about that when I was originally going through, but it's a lot easier to control because you can't move on across the screen and a lot
just vertical,
fair.
And you're like locked to the edges, which I think actually improves the gameplay dramatically.
Yeah, because you don't have to focus on like as many angles and vectors. You just have to, okay, am I at the right vertical pitch or whatever to hit that back?
Yeah.
So with all that being said, I went and I played a emulated version of Pong that I found that was pretty good, recreated it pretty well, and had sounds that I think were pretty close to the original. I gave it a 8 out of 10 for overall.
Wow.
I said it's definitely skewed because it's Pong. I mean, it's, and you'll see when I go into the individual categories that it's the relevance that's carrying it a lot.
Yeah.
So it's Pong. It's got the name recognition. When we're talking about it, it's got to be important because everyone knows it. The gameplay, the graphics, the sound, they're all pretty simple, but everyone knows the name, whether, as we'll touch on later, it's from this original Pong or other clones that people know the game from. And it just had a lot of mass appeal, which I think helped the name stick through all these years. But going into my individual categories, graphics, I just gave it a 2 out of 10. Pretty simple and bland, but I was really happy there's a score on the screen, so I don't have to manually keep track.
Yeah.
Sounds, I gave it a 2 out of 10, which is like huge compared to what we've been
I know.
giving stuff recently, because it has sound and it has beeps and boops, and just like I was saying, that essential and iconic like arcade sound.
Yeah. Why don't we play a little sound clip of that right now?
And then for gameplay, I gave it a 4 out of 10, which again, very high for the stuff we've played recently. And I think a lot of that is just it's simple and a lot easier to jump into than a lot of the other games that we had. So, it's just simple fun, hit it back and forth, not too much to learn. So easy 4 out of 10 for me.
Yeah. And like competitive too, I feel like.
Yeah, and especially in that
sweaty, playing multiplayer with your friend,
Yeah, exactly. Because it's got the 2 joysticks on and you can get really tense with it. And the arcade atmosphere, I feel like, lends itself to that pretty well too. Because you could just all huddle around, whether you're getting drinks or having sodas and pizzas with your buds, and really build that competitive atmosphere. And lastly, as I mentioned, the relevance, which carried this mainly for the huge score I gave it, I feel like you can't give it less than a 9 out of 10. Just because it's got the new technology on the table tennis idea and a new interpretation of it, has the arcade cabinet, and basically everything that we've talked about so far. I don't want to reiterate too much, but created the arcade atmosphere we know today. It's this huge hit. Everyone knows the name Pong when they're talking about video games. So I felt like I had to give it a real high rating for that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess eventually it was inevitable that some game would kind of spark the video gaming industry, but I think it kind of was Pong in some ways. So
yeah,
before Pong, it was just like, I think, what was our most best-selling game? I want to say Computer Space sold maybe like 1,000 copies or something.
Yeah, and whichever one was the cabinet too. I forget if that was Space War or not, but I think it also was fairly popular, but it was still just that one unit.
And I know the Magnavox sold like okay, but it wasn't like great. But this is the first time we had a game like take off,
Right, yeah, to really kind of kickstart the industry.
Yeah, so amazing game.
Absolutely. So do you want to move on to the next honorable mentions that we have on here?
Yes. So for the next couple honorable mentions, basically 1973, as we've mentioned, is like the year of the Pong clones. Okay. I've had to like do a lot of research to figure out, are these games any different from Pong at all? And there's a lot of them. So I kind of grouped them into a couple different groups. So for this first group, I have exact duplicates. So these are basically Pong with a different name at the top. And these ones are by the big companies that are going to enter the video gaming industry for the first time. The first one of those is called Paddle Battle. By the way, all these came out in 1973. So, a little over a month after Pong. I don't think any of them came out in 72. Although Paddle Battle would be one of the very first Pong clones to be made. And I think it was very early in 1973. And this one is important because it was developed by Allied Leisure, and they were, like I mentioned, like they kind of hopped onto this Pong bandwagon like really early, and they already had the infrastructure of producing arcade cabinets and all the technology behind that, being a arcade manufacturer for a couple of years now. So they were able to like outsell Pong, especially in those early months, and they did so well that the Pong kind of style of games would actually be called the paddle ball genre of video gaming. It wasn't the Pong genre, it was the paddle ball genre. And that's because of Paddle Battle doing so well, and also because of the next game called Paddle Ball by Williams Electronics, which was another exact duplicate. So those games, I think, definitely together outsold Pong in its lifespan. So kind of unfortunate for Atari, but good for the industry. They got, 2 big names joining the industry there. We also have Computer Spaceball, which is by Nutting Associates. So they weren't going to lie down after Dabney left, I guess, and just be like, okay, I guess computer games are done now. They, I guess, just blatantly ripped off their game. So after they left. But yeah, so they made Computer Spaceball. We also had a game called Winner come out. Winner was made by Midway, and this one's kind of interesting because it was officially licensed by Atari, which I think was the only Pong clone officially licensed by them. And Midway is obviously a massive company that we'll talk about more later. We also have Pongtron. This is Sega's entrance into the video game market after being in the electromechanical market for many years now. And obviously, we're going to know a lot about Sega in the future, but this is their very first video game, a Pong clone called Pongtron. And finally, we've got Ele Pong. That's E-L-E Pong by Teishio. And Teishio is another massive company based out of Japan that we're going to be hearing a lot from because they're going to go on to make Space Invaders. So a lot of really important people entering the market trying to jump on that Pong fad right now, but there is definitely a lot more companies than just big ones. So why don't you tell us about the rest, Wes?
Sure, yeah. So on to many more Pong clones by companies that we probably won't recognize their names. First one that we have is called Volley by a company called Ramtech. And then on to TV Ping Pong by Chicago Coin. TV Ping Pong, again, I guess, by Emutronics.
Okay, they're very original, with these names.
Right, just throw an adjective on there and some version of table tennis or ping pong, and then you got yourself a game.
Yep.
And then TV Table Tennis and Tennis by a company called Volley. And a bunch of other ones. Winner 2, Champion Ping Pong, Pong in a Barrel. That's a good one. And Barrel Pong.
Yeah, both of those last two I think were by Atari, but they were just re-releases of Pong and different cabinets for some reason.
Right. Maybe it has barrels drawn on it, and they're like, oh, look, new game.
And one was actually, it was literally a barrel with a TV monitor in it of Pong. I think that was Pong in a Barrel. And then Barrel Pong, I think, was the Australian release. By the way, you mentioned TV Table Tennis and Tennis by Volley, but they're actually two different games. I just want to clarify that real quick.
Yes.
I probably just wrote it in the notes, kind of weird. I don't know who made TV Table Tennis. I didn't write it down. It was probably some company we've already mentioned.
Right.
Yeah, and then we still have more. Those are all Pong clones. There's more. These next kind of grouping of games, I just wrote as lost games because the only information I have of them is that a flyer existed. There's no video, there's no description, there's no pictures, there's no emulation. It's just a flyer, which apparently we've got really good collections of flyers lying around. But a flyer doesn't mean that it was ever made. For some of the flyers, I think the pictures in them were sketches. They weren't even real. So, but they could have been real games. I'm not sure. So one was Rally by 4Play. Again, 4Play, that's impossible to research. We had Pongtron 2 by Sega, Scoring by Volley, Sports Center by 4Play, and that's it. So I think they were all Pong clones, but there's just no way to know. I just wanted to mention them just for the sake of mentioning them.
Yeah, and for the sake of getting to say 4Play about 5 more times.
Oh yeah, 4Play. I don't think they're going to be around that long.
And next up, we have one that's not really a video game, but important because of who created it. And that was the Laser Clay shooting system, which used projectors. And I think it wasn't exactly a light gun game, but sort of along the same lines, right?
Yeah.
And important because it's Nintendo's entry into first-party video game development. And of course, we're going to be hearing tons and tons about Nintendo later.
Oh, yeah. And I like how they helped develop the gun for the Magnavox, and they're like, we've got all these guns laying around. Let's make our gun game.
Yeah, might as well make a game.
Yeah. And I think, so we're kind of wrapping up on Pong in this first section, which is good. So we've got a couple games now that I want to talk about that are computer games. So computer games are still being made in 1973, which is really good. The first one we're going to talk about is called Hercule. And I actually wanted to review this one in full and give it a full rating. But once I started playing it, it's just there's nothing there. Basically, what the game is you've got a 10 by 10 grid. And somewhere on that grid is hiding a Hercule, which is like, I guess, a creature you're trying to find. And basically you pick a point on the grid and it's like the Hercule is northwest or the Hercule is south, and then you pick a new point and it'll tell you again until you find it. And you have to find it in, I think, 5 moves. But if you start on like 5-5 on the grid and just follow what it says, like, it's impossible to lose. Like, as long as you're not being stupid, it's impossible. So I just thought, like, there's nothing to this game. I can't review it. So I picked a different one, which I'll talk about in a second. But after Hercule is a game called Snark that came out, and Snark actually couldn't find much information on. All I know is that it came out sometime around Hercule and was similar to Hercule. Basically, it used the radius of a circle to tell you if you were, or I guess the diameter of a circle to tell you if the Snark was inside the circle or outside the circle. So you would say like 5-5 radius 2, and it'd be like the Snark is inside the circle, and you would know, okay, he's in here somewhere. I can reduce the size until you had a circle with a radius of 0, and then you would win if it was on top of the Snark. So
interesting.
Kind of a slightly different take on Hercule that I think is a little bit more complicated, but I couldn't find the code for that, so I couldn't play it. But I could play this next game, and this next game I feel like did have enough for me to give it a full rating, which is called Mugwump. Which all these games, by the way, are just great titles. So Mugwump is similar to Hercule and Snark. You've got, this time, 4 different creatures on basically a 10x10 grid. However, instead of saying north and south or using the radius of circles, it says your distance away from Mugwump number 1 is 2.2, and your distance away from Mugwump number 3 is 7.8, and it would tell you all 4. And you'd have to find all 4 within 10 moves. This game is a lot harder than the last 2.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, you have to find 4 creatures in 10 moves, and basically the distance that they give you, it uses decimals, like I said. So basically it's all about figuring out the, those like right angle sort of figures.
Oh, right. Pythagorean theorem kind of thing.
Yeah, so if it was like, diagonally up 1, then it would be, 1.4 away, right?
Right, okay.
1 plus 1 is 2 square root, so it's harder. I mean, you have to use a lot more math. It's hard because, it might say it's 1.4 away, but it could be 1.4 up, like to the northeast, the northwest, the southwest, the southeast, and they're all 1.4 away. So that there were times when, like my very first game, which was my best run, I was at the very end. I was on turn 10, and he was 1 square away. I collected all the other 3 Mugwumps. I just had 1 to go, and I was like, man, he could be 1 to the right or 1 up. I know that, but it's a 50-50. Like, I couldn't. Like, I didn't have any other info, so I guessed wrong and I lost.
No.
I know, but I tried 2 more times and did worse. So, I think it's one of those games where at the beginning I was really taking my time and trying to figure it out, and after I played like 2 games, I was just like flying through and wasn't doing well at all. Because sometimes you're just like, you pick your 5-5 starting point, and then you just have to randomly pick another one to see how the distances have changed, and then try to narrow it down that way. So, I've seen some other people playing this, and they like took out a Excel spreadsheet and made a 10x10 graph to help to calculate the distances and the possible places and stuff. And I just try to do it in my head. So I think if I had done it that way, it would have been a lot better. But you know how I am with math games. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah. As we'll see with the one I'm about to talk about, I'm kind of the same way.
Yeah. But I think it had more going for it than Hercule, certainly. I mean, Hercule was basically nothing. And this, I did feel like it was a game, it had it randomized where the 4 creatures were, which was nice. So every game was a little different. Overall, I thought the gameplay was like a 1.5 out of 10. I think it was okay, but definitely not worth playing more than 2 times, I think. For graphics, this was a text-based game, as was Hercule and Snark. They're all text-based computer games. So I just had to give it a 0. There's nothing. They didn't even like make a fake grid or anything using dashes. So yeah, just like the Hercule #1 is 7.8 away. That's all the graphics I got.
That's all you get.
There was no sound. And for relevance, I gave it a 5, mainly because it helped influence your next game, Wes, which actually, if I recall, is fairly popular. So yeah, that was Mugwump. It was also released in a very famous book that we're going to be talking about next episode. So I'll talk a little bit more about it there. But because of that book, I think it gained even more popularity. So overall, I gave it like a 1.6 out of 10. It's not good, but it's not like Hammurabi levels of bad. So I think it was okay. Yeah.
At least an improvement on that.
Yeah.
So going on, like you mentioned, the next game, along the same vein as the Hercule Snark and Mugwump, and also named similarly, I got to play through Hunt the Wumpus.
Oh yeah.
Which I just love saying. And this was released in May of 1973. Basically the same concept as those other games, but I'll get into that later. It was created by a guy named Gregory Yob, and the main reason he made this is he saw all these text-based games where you were hunting a creature and the computer was generating your next moves and the map on a sort of 10 by 10 grid.
Yep, which we just talked about them. Those were the games. That's like referring to, yeah.
Yeah, and he I guess there were a lot of them too. I mean, maybe more than those 3, but definitely those 3 that people were playing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Man, wouldn't it be cool if instead of a 10 by 10 grid, we made it the points on a dodecahedron?"
Well, I think, who's the dodecahedron fans out there? We know Gregory Yob is one, so there's at least
he
one.
Loves them. And I guess with that, he was like, all right, let's make a game. I got this dodecahedron. So what you did, sort of similar to the other games, you had the Wumpus started in a random room. You started in a random room, and you have to find and kill the Wumpus because it's, I don't know, terrorized the city or something. It did something wrong, and you got to kill it.
Yeah.
But in this, you actually have arrows that can travel from 1 to 5 rooms, and you have 5 of these arrows, and you can shoot them in a certain direction over however many rooms you choose, and if you hit the Wumpus, you win.
That's kind of cool.
And it makes it a little bit more interesting than just kind of doing the math and figuring out where to go.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, you could definitely do the math to figure out. I didn't ever get to that point because the fact that it was based on a dodecahedron, I was like, I don't even want to try to think about what I would have to do to calculate where he is.
Yeah.
But it also did add a little bit of interesting flavor in some of the text that it had with hazards. Like there were 2 super bats, they were called, that if you walked into a room with one of them, they would randomly transport you to another room.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah. And then there's also bottomless pits, which my first experience with both of those was walking into a room with a bat that threw me into a bottomless pit, which just instantly loses you the game.
Oh, good.
So it had those. The Wumpus was immune to pits because he has sucker feet, as was specifically mentioned.
Oh, okay.
And I think, I forget exactly the conditions, but also the Wumpus moved whenever you did certain actions. If you shot a bow near it but missed it, it would move. And also I think if you were moved by a super bat, it would move. There were a couple conditions in which it would go to a different room, and the text that you were given was by scent of whether or not you could smell the Wumpus nearby. And that just meant that it was in an adjacent room.
Oh, okay. And then what? You just like guessed which room it was? Was there any way to?
Yeah. I think if you were making a map, I was reading that the designer originally wanted people to make maps, but I think a lot of people kind of just randomly guessed.
I mean, I can barely even think about how it would make a 3D dodecahedron and draw it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you could maybe lay it out sort of like they do with maps of like the globe to make it look realistic, but I don't know. I think a lot of this was just to make a cool game, but also show, hey, look, a computer can do something more complicated than a 10 by 10 grid.
Yeah.
So I played through it a couple times. My main experiences were if I shot randomly, I sometimes killed the Wumpus and won.
Nice.
When I actually thought about what I was doing, I lost.
Yeah, that was kind of my Mugwump experience.
So for the ratings, I gave it for graphics 0 out of 10. Same thing. It's a text game and didn't really do anything inventive to make like ASCII characters or anything like that. Sound also 0 out of 10. And for gameplay, I think some people out there might like it, but for me, it was a 1 out of 10. I like the sort of setting that for whatever reason you're hunting this poor monster, but I just, not my cup of tea, just going into rooms and seeing if you can sniff the Wumpus.
Yeah. I love that you're sniffing him out with his
Yeah,
sucker
yeah.
feet. They're very small,
Yeah,
very strong stench with those sucker feet.
That's got to be what it is. I'm surprised you can't hear him when he's walking on the walls.
By the way, all 4 of these games have great names for their monsters. The Hercule,
They
Snark, Mugwump, and Wumpus.
I wonder if all these guys were like working together on stuff and they're like, oh yeah, that's great.
As I'll talk about in next week's episode, I believe most of these games were published in some sort of recurring magazine, so that everybody was reading.
Oh, okay, so that makes sense. It was kind of the thing at the time, so everyone was sort of playing off each other's ideas.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the magazine had the source code in it, but it might have had the source code in it, so people could just like take the Hercule and be like, I'm just going to change a couple code lines, and here we got Snark, I don't know.
Right. And that was kind of the atmosphere, or I guess like attitude to games at that point with computer games. It's like everyone sharing and making new iterations of them.
Yeah, especially in the computer sort of space.
Right, as opposed to arcade machines and all that.
Yeah.
And so for the last category, I did give it a 3 out of 10 for relevance, just because I learned as I was doing research that the mascot for Discord is called the Wumpus, and Discord credits this game as giving them the idea for the creature.
Which
so
is
that
great.
cute little pig thing that shows up, yeah.
Now we know it has sucker feet.
Exactly, and maybe we're better off not knowing it.
That's pretty cool, though.
So overall, I gave it a 1 out of 10. Math doesn't add up, but I kind of average mine.
Yeah.
Might have some nostalgia and relevance for some people, but for me, I played through it a couple times, and I was like, well, glad to know it exists, but I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it, again, is one of those examples where making it more like weird and challenging, not necessarily better video game. Though
Right, yeah.
not, people don't just be like, oh yeah, I know what that is.
Maybe all the people playing games at that point in time did, but man, I sure didn't.
Nope. The education system failed me there. To be fair, I really hate geometry. So, unless of course
Yeah,
you're talking about Mobius loops, which I love those.
Oh, jeez. Well, I mean, you've lost me at this point. I took.
You don't know Mobius loop? Come on, Wes. Mobius
You'll have
loops
to
are
educate
great.
me at some point. That'll be our special topic some episode, maybe.
I know, but there's a great YouTube video by a YouTube channel called Stand Up Maths, who does like a little lecture on Mobius loops, and literally it's like a single piece of paper that you twist up and then tape together, and then you cut it in half, and instead of it being cut in half, it just like transforms into 2 loops or something that are connected.
Okay, interesting.
It's real. Sorry, that was like a weird Mobius loop rant, but they're cool. I'm a big fan.
Well, I'll have to check it out. I'm sure all the listeners will want to check it out too.
I recommend it.
And so that's all I had for Hunt the Wumpus. Next, we're going to be moving on to our next honorable mention. And this was Crazy Foot in '73 by Bally Manufacturing. And this was a table tennis clone, kind of based off the Magnavox Odyssey version of table tennis, but it was on an arcade cabinet. And then later, Bally Manufacturing came out with Tennis Coupe, which was the same thing, but had better controls and some bug fixes.
Yep. They're like, we're not gonna fix Crazy Foot. We're just gonna sell the better version.
Sell the new one.
Yeah, which I feel like is kind of caught on. And that brings me to my second game that I've reviewed. And this finally is a good game. I feel like I haven't had a good game in a while.
Yeah, you've been going through a rough patch with all of these.
I know, freaking Mugwump. It was Hammurabi just like was a downfall for the whole podcast for me. But finally, I'm at Space Race. This came out July 16th of 1973 and was Atari's second game. This is the game that Atari wanted to make in the beginning, because if you remember, Wes mentioned that Pong was just like a test for, what was it, Alan
Alcorn, yeah.
Alan Alcorn. So this is the game Atari really wanted to make, which was called Space Race. And Space Race, the best way I can describe it is Frogger in space multiplayer. So you're like,
I'm sold.
I know. Like, first of all, Frogger's great. Second of all, being in space is great. Third of all, playing like racing your friend to the top of the screen is like something that Frogger should be like jumping on right now. Like, I don't even know why that's not a thing.
Yeah, really. It's got to exist somewhere, I'm sure. But.
Yeah, it's just got to. But it's just a great concept for a video game. I mean, having it's a race and you want to get there really fast, but if you get there too fast, you're gonna like get hit by asteroids that are coming from the left hand side of the screen. And it's not random, so I feel like if you played this long enough, you'd be able to like really just win all the time. But it's such a like nail-biting experience playing this game, because it's a race, but it's also, you have to be patient and let asteroids pass, you know, even go backwards sometimes to dodge asteroids coming in your direction. It's just great. You start from the bottom of the screen and you just vertically only go straight up, so you couldn't go side to side, but just straight up and down. And once you got to the top, it would give you a point, and you start back at the bottom, and like first person to, I think, 5 points wins. So,
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it was good. It had sound, which we'll play a clip of right now so everybody can hear. So like pretty good sound. The sound was very kind of nostalgic, and I quite liked it. There's that, I'm sure you guys could hear, there was that like little humming thing, which corresponded to how high you were on the screen. So the higher you were on the screen, the higher pitch the humming would be to kind of make you feel like you're getting closer. Yeah, so for sound, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I mean, there's no music, but I thought it was pretty decent, especially for the time. For graphics, I gave it a 2 out of 10 as well. I think the graphics are pretty good. The spaceship model is really nice. It kind of reminds me of the computer spaceship models, but maybe a little bit updated. But it was, I mean, compared to the squares we're used to seeing in these games, like Pong was just a square, you know, a couple squares on some lines. You know, this is a massive improvement, I feel like. And then for gameplay, I gave it a 4 out of 10, which I think is pretty high, you know, rivaling anything else that I've rated on the podcast so far. But
yeah,
it's a good game. I feel like if this was at an arcade even today, you could play it with a buddy and be pretty happy and have a good time, I feel like, for like a quarter or two. So yeah, I mean, it's nothing crazy. It's not a game that you could play over and over again, I feel like, because at the end of the day, it's just black and white with, you know, asteroids coming in the same pattern all the time. It's not, if you think about something like Frogger, it takes you to different locations and you're dodging different things, but this is just a single screen for the most part. But considering this came out in the middle of 1973 as the second major video game by Atari, and considering how good it is, I gave the relevance a 7 out of 10, which I think is pretty high. I think it deserves to be high. It's just a great game overall. I really enjoyed playing it. I recommend everybody going and checking it out. Overall, I gave it, like, if you average all those scores, it's like a 3.75, which I feel like is kind of low for what it is. I think it's better than that, but
right. But I mean, if you're looking at all the things that, all your scores from recent games, that's definitely pretty high for everything we've had so far.
Yeah. And I think it was one of the games I've enjoyed the most playing for a while now. So it felt like a current game, even though it's old, you know? Wow. I think, well, it's just the fact that it really reminded me of Frogger a lot. And Frogger is a very iconic game that I've played a lot of somehow. I guess I don't even know where I play Frogger at, but I've definitely played it.
Yeah, I was trying to think that too. There must have been Flash games on sites, and then there's also that Disney owns one now that's popular called Crossy Road, which is basically Frogger.
Okay, and then maybe a year or two ago, we used to do mystery races that I would host, and I had Frogger as one of those games. I don't know if we ever actually played it, but I was planning on giving it to somebody. Just a great game, and I feel like this is basically the soul of that. It's just Frogger just took it to another level, but Frogger also like lost the multiplayer aspect, which this has, and I feel like that adds a lot. Because you're with Frogger, you're trying to get to the top, but you could take as long as you want and take your time. But with this, it's a race. So, you're really like, if there's just like a small gap between two asteroids, you're like, I can make that. I need to make that.
Got to take those risks so you can show your friend up.
I know. And I quite like that. So the actual, like the hitboxes and stuff, I thought were actually like reasonable. There wasn't a time where I thought, oh, that didn't actually hit me, So I think it's a pretty good game. I'm pretty happy about it, and I'm glad I got it this week.
You deserved it after what you slogged through before. It sounds like it was a really good game.
I know. I mean, I feel like I had to give you Pong this week because you've played table tennis and tennis for two, which I feel like kind of is the lineage of Pong. So
very, very generous of you. Yeah, to give me.
Yeah, you got that Atari game. I got the second one. So.
And so with that, we can move on to our last honorable mention. This one's called Lemonade Stand. It's pretty much like Hammurabi. You're selling lemonade at different costs and different quantities, and you're choosing how much to advertise and taking all those factors along with some RNG factors in the game to see how much profit you make. And mercifully, we didn't play this one.
Yes, thank the Lord. I don't know why. When I was doing research, Lemonade Stand came up a lot. I don't know why it seems to be kind of popular. But I looked into it, and there's no way I was going to play it. I was like, this looks terrible. And it really reminded me of Hammurabi, because it was kind of like you pick how much, you had like a couple $100, and it was like, how much do you want to spend on making lemonade? How much do you want to spend on advertising? How much do you want to spend on something else? And then there would be RNG factors like it's raining, nobody came. So, yeah, I don't know why it's popular, but
I mean, maybe somebody who made it out there.
Yeah, maybe somebody who made it made something else later, but if that's the case, we'll just talk about that later thing.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was sort of the beginning of 1973. We kind of went from the end of 1972 through really July of 1973, ending with Space Race. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode on the very first episode of the Pong Era. There's going to be a couple episodes sort of in this series because of how popular Pong is. And because of that, we talked about Atari's history a little bit in the special segment this morning. And in the timeline, just as a quick recap, we talked about Pong first. We talked about some of the clones from it, some of the companies that entered, companies like Midway, Sega, Tatio, Nutting Associates, Allied Leisure, Williams Electronics, and we talked about some of the other clones. All of them exact duplicates, by the way. Like nothing has changed. I've kind of put some of the ones that have changed into next week's episode, so we'll talk about them more later. Also, we talked about the laser clay shooting system by Nintendo. They're getting in on some action, even though it's not a video game yet. We talked about some computer games, Hercule Snark, Mugwump, and Hunt the Wumpus. So,
of course.
Yeah, and finally Space Race, a really good game to end it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to check us out on our website. I know the website isn't up to date. It's like impossible to keep the website up to date with the podcast, but if you enjoy what we do, be sure to let us know. And if there's a game you specifically want on the website, maybe let me know. I can kind of speed that one along. Also, a reminder, we're not here next week. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. And
don't forget to check us out on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter. I think that's everything. How you feeling, Wes? Feeling good?
Feeling good. Yeah, ready to wrap this one up, I think.
All right, we'll see you guys next week with the Pong Era Part 2.
See you later.